and if you don't vote for me, you get your book taken away.
Extortion.
I'm learning from the union bosses.
Chicago.
Listen, I'm going to write down. Wow, thank you for that kind introduction. What can I say? I'm just pleased to be here at this wonderful event. What are you all doing here in the middle of summer? I mean, it's terrible. Pardon?
It's the nicest time in Chicago.
Okay. I mean, the Heartland Institute is an organization that I am just so proud of and proud to be here speaking at. I know that this organization believes, as I do, in the ideas that really matter. And I want to thank you all for what you do to advance free market solutions to our nation's most vexing problems, including education, healthcare, and government spending. Many of these same issues are greatly affected by government employee unions. And that's what I'm going to address today. In our time together, I'm going to give you an overview of the landscape of government unions in America. I'm going to give you 10 ways, because we don't have much more time than that the shadow bosses control America and are harming our freedoms. I'll also explain how the shadow bosses helped Obama win a second term, and the paybacks that these unions may see in the second Obama administration. And I'm going to conclude with what you can do about this and what we can do about this with your help. Before I get into the actual presentation's substance, I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of how union bosses operate. A Chicago union boss was up for election, and the union official who he had appointed, who was handling the election, called him up. Said, I got some good news for you, and I got some bad news for you. So he said, well, what's the bad news? He said, your opponent, the reformer, got 53% of the vote. He said, well, what's the good news? There can't be any good news. He said, you got 54. And that's how elections are handled by a lot of unions. I want to share with you a little bit about why I wrote Shadow Bosses. For years, I've written and spoken about how government restrains American business. Government overregulates business, overtaxes business, and gives unions extensive power over business. I've always tried to understand why government creates an environment hostile to business, since it's the private sector that drives our economy, creates jobs, increases our prosperity. In fact, I found that government employee unions fuel excessive regulation, growth in the size of government, and overtaxation. And they fuel it in Congress, they fuel it in our state houses, they fuel it in our city councils, and they even fuel it on our school boards. Our government is spending too much on government employees, hiring too many, and paying them too much. And those policies, first and foremost, benefit government employee unions and their bosses. Government employee unions spend literally billions, yes, billions of dollars to elect politicians who will vote their way. As we show in Shadow Bosses, they get this money from the dues they collect from America's workers. Okay, just how unionized is our government? Government employees, government workers, are 5 times as unionized, more than 5 times as unionized as the private sector employees. Less than 7% of the private sector are members of a union. But of the 20.5 million people that work for government, over 40% were represented by a union in 2012. Teachers, firemen, police, and postal workers, well, they're among the most unionized government employees. But government unions now represent almost every type of government worker, including federal border patrol agents, office workers in state and local governments, university professors, graduate student assistants in state universities. My friends, even zookeepers and NASA scientists. Government is the growth area for unions compared with the decline of unions in the private sector. Let's put this in perspective for a second. The entire domestic auto industry, which is heavily unionized, has 219,000 unionized workers. A lot of workers. While the U.S. Post Office alone has 477,000 unionized workers. That's almost 2.5 times as many. And we all know how the Postal Service is faring, don't we? Many people argue that unionizing government employees is not a problem because strikes are illegal for federal workers and many state and local government workers. But of course, making strikes illegal doesn't actually prevent strikes from happening. The recent Chicago teachers' strike appears to have been illegal, but teachers went on strike and stayed away on strike. New York City transit workers, Tacoma, Washington teachers, Detroit teachers, postal workers, they've all gone on strike illegally. These are just a few of the many illegal strikes by government workers. Government unionism makes it more likely that government workers will not be able to provide critical government services like fire, police, and other protections as a result of strikes and work stoppages. Government employee unions have a huge influence over our political system, and they're driving big government spending and over-regulation of our economy. I'm going to give you 10 ways that government employee unions are harming America. 1. Unions corrupt our political process. Government unions aren't just bankrupting our economy. They're also compromising our system of free elections. Unions themselves, and this is all we could find, collect over $14 billion, yes, billion dollars a year in dues annually. That's bigger than the economies of about 68 countries. And these unions themselves, they themselves say that they only use 20 to 30% on member representation, which includes organizing new workers. What do you think the unions use the rest of the money for? A lot goes for political spending, right. Government unions use bought and paid for politicians to pass legislation granting them never-unending benefits. Government employee unions like to say that they get to elect their own bosses. The shadow bosses actually put into power the people who make the decisions about salaries, benefits, and work rules for their members, as well as laws and regulations that govern the unions themselves. My friends, who wouldn't want that deal? Money flows from the government employee unions to the politicians and then back again to the unions in a never-ending cycle of greed and corruption. Politicians know that the union money will cycle back to them in return for their pro-union votes. And if they cross those unions, the unions will throw them right out of office. Unions reward their friends and punish their enemies, and they do it very effectively. 2, government unions drive excessive spending on government employees. Private sector unions have to make sure that their demands are not so excessive that the private employer is driven out of business. Outrageous concessions to unions don't drive the government out of business, and they don't make their union members lose their jobs. Government will always be in business, and they know that. Unwieldy union contracts just make government immensely bigger and more expensive and more burdensome to you, the taxpayers. Government employees make more money, work less, have greater job security, have more retirement security than private sector workers. Nearly 500,000 federal government employees make over $100,000 per year before benefits, and they receive up to 10 weeks paid vacation. 3, government unions are private organizations that get special benefits and special treatment from our government. It's important to realize that government unions, like all unions, are private organizations. Government employees get their business directly from the unions get their business directly from our government, but government employee unions are not part of our government. Unions represent government employees because that's their business, to represent government employees. The more government employees that they represent, the more dues they get. It's that simple. Government unions don't work for the public good and never have. The problem is that our government elevates one private group, government employee unions, and it elevates them out of proportion to anyone else. It elevates them out of proportion to taxpayers, to citizens, and to their rank and file members. Under the First Amendment, you all have a right to speak, right? But you don't have to be listened to by government. Government does not have to listen to you. You can petition government, for example, but the government doesn't have to listen to you. But there is a group that does have a right to force government to listen to them. Government employee unions. With collective bargaining, public officials are forced to bargain with the unions. They can't just ignore their demands and walk away from the table. This means that unions have more rights and more power over our government than other groups or even citizens in America today. And it's gotten much worse under President Obama. 4, Barack Obama, drawing on his roots as an SEIU union organizer right here in Chicago, has given government employee unions more access to the White House and more kickbacks than any president in history. He's handed them money through stimulus bills and other spending and given them greater control over the federal workplace. He's unionized tens of thousands of government workers and reduced scrutiny of their finances. My friends, he is truly our first union-labeled president. 5, government unions get huge subsidies from taxpayers. The American taxpayer is unwittingly paying government workers for the time that they work on union matters instead of their actual jobs. It's called official time, sometimes it's called release time. Nationwide, taxpayers pay for over 23 million hours of official time, which represents a $1 billion subsidiary. $1 billion subsidiary to a private organization, unions. And by the way, the federal number can be found deeply buried in material from the Office of Personnel Management, OPM. What do these employees work on while they're on official time? No one knows for sure. Certainly, they don't work on our government's business. Some union officials and members spend a few hours per week on union work. Others spend all their time on union business. At the Department of Homeland Security, we were just looking at that the other day. We've already found 62 people at Homeland Security that are paid with our tax dollars to work full-time on union business, getting pensions, promotions, and all the other things that go with a position. Official time is a huge taxpayer-funded subsidy which gives government employee unions more money to spend on other activities like politics. Thank you. And there are many other subsidies that the unions get, including government collecting union dues automatically from employee paychecks, and many outright grants to unions for green job training and other types of job training, which seems to produce little economic benefit for our nation. 6, the teachers' unions are holding back America's K-12 education and making our students less competitive. We were the first to come up with this number. We believe we were the first. Teachers' unions take in, just in dues annually, $2 billion a year from teachers, and mostly from the forced dues states. And they spend it in all 50 states to promote educational policies for the benefit of the unions. But not for the benefit of our children. The teachers' unions spend millions to quash school choice initiatives, online education, homeschooling, all of which threatens their control over K-12 education and their indoctrination of our children with secularism, socialism, and government worker unionism. Teachers' unions and the shadow bosses like to portray themselves as working for the benefit of children. But their position is summed up quite nicely by Albert Shanker, former head of the American Federation of Teachers, who was reported to have said, "When school children start paying union dues, that's when I'll start representing the interests of school children." 7, government unions are bankrupting our states. States and cities with the longest and strongest history of government employee unions are also the states and cities with the worst budget crises. Government employee unions were a major contributing factor, and perhaps the major contributing factor to our state and local budgetary crises. Unions are bankrupting our states and cities with outrageous salaries, overtime pensions, and feather bedding for government employees, and they're crowding out other spending in state and local budgets. Of the 10 states with the highest debt per capita, all of them are heavily unionized, and none of them are right-to-work states. Taxpayers are fleeing the unionized states for the greener pastures and freer pastures of less unionized states. The heavily unionized states have lost, while right-to-work states as a group have gained 8 to 9 representatives in each of the last 3 times congressional delegates have been reapportioned based on population. That's 8 to 9. Each time. Times 3, exactly. My friends, America is becoming 2 distinct nations. The forced union nation and the free nation. 8, the government unions were great supporters of the Occupy Wall Street movement. Remember that? But it's the union bosses who are the true 1%. By taking rank-and-file members' dues, union bosses are able to make an average of more than 10 times their members' salary. Former 31-year AFSCME President Gerald McEntee made $512,000 in 2011 and spent $325,000 on private planes. And AFSCME's former Secretary-Treasurer made $847,000. American Federation of Teachers President Randy Weingarten, $500,000, more than 10 times an average teacher. NEA President Dennis Van Ruckel, close to $500,000. Over half of the employees at the NEA's headquarters make over $75,000 in base salary a year. Talk about income inequality. Occupy Wall Street and rank-and-file union members should be occupying the union's cushy headquarter buildings around the White House and Congress. 9, Obamacare is a secret plot to unionize 21 million healthcare workers. Today, less than 10% of of healthcare workers are unionized. And we can compare that to Canada, which has a nationalized health service, where 60% of healthcare workers are unionized. That's what Obamacare is likely to bring to our country. Obamacare will result in more healthcare workers that work directly for government, and more private healthcare workers being paid under government programs, all of whom can be unionized as government employees. Of the 1.5 million healthcare workers that are unionized currently, the unions are going after the 21 million that are going to be needed to implement Obamacare. So this is a huge growth area that could fuel the union movement for the next 20 years. And you saw who was the newly elected president of the SEIU, Mary Henry, who's quite adept at organizing in the healthcare area. That's what she is, a very adept healthcare organizer. Let me put this all in perspective. Here's the rule of thumb for you all. For every million new members they can force into paying union dues, that's $1 billion a year for the unions in recurring revenue annually. 1 million new workers, $1 billion a year. That's the rule of thumb, my friends. And 10, and I could go on and on. There's like 50 of these I can go on with, given the time. To grow bigger, government unions are targeting tens of millions of Americans. Even you. And they're going to try to force you to be unionized. The unions use political favors to get state governments to turn self-employed workers that receive money from government programs into government employees who can be unionized. It started here under one of your illustrious governors. In 10 states now, state governments have used this model to forcibly unionize independent care workers. The same model could be used to unionize any group of Americans that receives money under government programs, such as veterans, Social Security recipients, Medicare and Medicaid recipients. Already unions like the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME, promote retirement unions, under which retirees pay AFSCME to lobby government to increase retiree benefits, including Social Security and Medicare. In our book, Shadowbosses, we explain these and other findings. And we explain exactly how government unions harm our economic freedom and harm our prosperity. In the last few years, our resistance to the expansion of union power seemed to be prevailing. Scott Walker in Wisconsin, Rick Snyder in Michigan, and other victories against the spread of government unions. And in response to these setbacks, the unions have doubled down on political spending, activism, and electioneering to build a monumental voter registration and get out the vote machine. And as a result, the unions almost single-handedly won the election for Obama in 2012. And there is a real danger that with this imbalance, unions now have a political infrastructure that could support a permanent majority for the Democrat Party. After Obama was reelected, Richard Trumka, head of the AFL-CIO, said that without the huge push by the nation's labor unions, Mr. Obama could never have won Ohio, Wisconsin, and Nevada, and their combined 34 electoral votes. The truth is, he's right. He's absolutely right. His organization's canvassing and get out the vote efforts were critical to President Obama's victory. I think Obama should hold a state dinner in his honor. Obama should at least continue to meet with him at the White House on a regular basis, as he did in his first administration, more than he met with most members of his cabinet. Let's put this in perspective. The union spent over $500 million, yes, $500 million, and put 400,000 so-called volunteers, many of which received compensation, on the streets to work for Team Obama. A single union, the SEIU, reported that it put 100,000 volunteers on the ground, principally, of course, in the swing states. The AFL-CIO alone registered more than 450,000 new voters from union households. AFL-CIO volunteers knocked on 11 million doors during the election. For the first time in 2012, unions were able to canvass and call voters who aren't members. And you know what that's a result of? Supreme Court's 2010 Citizens United decision. This decision meant that the unions could vastly increase their voter canvassing in all the battleground states and swing more union and non-union voters alike to President Obama. In key battleground states, the unions overloaded the landscape with volunteers, many of whom were actually paid for their efforts. Let's take an example of one state, Ohio. AFL-CIO volunteers contacted 800,000 voters during the last 4 days before the election. They also registered 70,000 new voters in Ohio and actually worked to get them to the polls. The SEIU, they focused on voter registration of African American and Latino voters in Ohio and other swing states. They used 2,300 full-time volunteers during the last 4 days of the campaign. And the SEIU helped raise the African American share of the vote in Ohio from 11% in 2008 to 15% this past year. Given all the things they did, Obama had a big victory there, percentage-wise, but he only won the state by 103,000 votes. The unions made the difference. Okay, what type of voter registration, canvassing, and get out the vote machine the Republican parties controlled in 2012? Nothing even approaching the scale of the coordinated and well-funded union political machine. If Republicans are going to survive as a party in national politics, they need to build a political infrastructure, particularly in the battleground states, that counters at least some of this monumental union influence. With the Obama victory, the unions are already starting to demand payback from President Obama for their critical contribution to his reelection. I'm going to give you 4 of the paybacks that the unions want, and a couple of which they're absolutely expecting during the second term. First one is card check legislation. They want to change the federal labor law to do away with secret ballot elections to unionize a federal workplace. AFL-CIO Trumka says, and I quote, "You'll see this within the term." Healthcare. They want to implement Obamacare so more healthcare workers are paid by government, and then they can be unionized as government workers. 3, they want insourcing. That's something you haven't really heard about much. They want to hire more federal workers instead of outsourcing services so that more government workers could be unionized. And the ultimate goal, ending right to work. Right now, businesses can take refuge in right-to-work states, which are growing faster than the more heavily unionized states and are much more friendly to business. But unions want businesses to be forced to use unionized labor in every state in this nation. Their ultimate goal is to repeal a tiny little section of the Taft-Hartley Labor Act, Taft-Hartley Act, Section 14B it's called, which currently allows states to be right-to-work states. If in those states, workers cannot be compelled, they can't be compelled to pay a union to keep their job. They can't be compelled to pay a union to keep their job. In other words, they don't have to pay tribute to a union to work. But to repeal right to work, the Democrats would have to have control of both houses of Congress. And this is the ultimate goal for the midterm elections. It's going to take all of us to stop the labor union bosses, the shadow bosses, from achieving their agenda during the second Obama administration and taking America further down the path of socialism. Socialism and decline. My friends, I especially appreciate the efforts here at the Heartland Institute to present free market arguments in the face of increasing government control over many areas of our American way of life. At Heartland here, the work being done is critically important, particularly at this time when government unions are exercising greater and greater control over our state and local governments. You out here are the heroes. You're the heroes in this battle. You're the people that are leading the fight to make sure government is held accountable to the people. You make sure that the freedoms of our great nation are preserved for the next generation. My friends, our greatest battles are ahead of us, and the fight's going to be long and hard. But with the help of each of you, we can assure America's freedom and prosperity into the future. I want to thank each of you for what you do to keep America the greatest country on earth and help to preserve its legacy for our children and our grandchildren. I thank you, and I'll take any questions. I'll start here, go here. Okay.
Yeah, back 40 years ago when I was forced to join the union, it was filled with mob bosses. How's the mob influence?
In most of the unions it isn't. We have a little chapter in the book called the Ivy League Amigos, and that's what some of the these are well-trained, well-educated Ivy League people making huge money.
Are the sons and daughters of the mob?
In some cases, a couple of cases, yes, but in general. Well, I say some cases. That's the perfect example. We go into that in great detail. Look, it's interesting how we walk with us.
Obviously, doing away with that executive order, which.
Well, let me tell you about Republican. Okay, I'm not going to mention the name. When my book came out about 8 months ago, I was speaking at a very famous luncheon in Washington that's held on Wednesday, and there's about 150 people there. I was speaking with a senior member of the leadership, who would remain nameless. And I gave the talk about the book, and I spent like 7, 8 minutes. I didn't give me the opportunity to bore you for as long as I did today. And they asked him about Obamacare and defunding it, and they asked about a whole bunch of things like that. That specific issues wasn't the one. And he gave the answer that I've heard every year. We have an election coming up. We don't want to rock the boat.
Mm.
Republicans, Democrats are more interested in keeping themselves in power than doing what's right for America. Both sides. And if it's going to rock the boat, they will, if it's potentially going to rock the boat, they will refrain from it. And you don't want to rock the boat. I mean, what was Karl Rove, what did he whisper in 40% of union households voted for you during the first term? So you don't want to rock the boat too much. This was about Bush. That's the problem. We don't have leaders. We have people who want to have power. Yes, ma'am.
You spoke about union people in the offices and everything making big salaries. Well, in Illinois, I read very briefly the part about the schools, and it said that Illinois was an F state, meaning that the unions control everything. Well, we have schools here, like my Lake Forest High School, who the average teacher salary in Lake Forest High School is about $115,000, and most of them are up in $150,000 and everything else, with huge pensions that they're getting. And one thing I noticed, though, about the school chapter, nothing was said about Common Core. And this is the important thing, like right now the Heartland is working on Joy Pullman. And this curriculum they want to put that will supersede even the United States as far as the United Nations. And I read last night that something about Islam, promoting that, and doing all these things. How can the school system get any more liberal than it is now? And yet they want Common Core put in, and Illinois is gung-ho for it. They love it, because that was one of the first states, I guess, to say okay to everything, and it's a failure. It will not work. It will be just produce little liberal people as they want to.
And it also lacks content, too.
Yeah, I know, we're lost. If they can put that curriculum in, we might as well forget about it, because we're producing activist liberalism in the public schools from grade school up.
You should see some of the books, and we reference it in our teacher chapter, that are being used out on the West Coast.
They're terrible. In Oregon, oh, you said I heard about that last night.
Did you?
Yes, yes.
I don't know if you. I don't know if you saw that. Just real quick. Can I bore you for another minute?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to get this completely right. So there's California. I mean, we all know California. I mean, you know California pretty well. I just want to. They're using these books. It just kills me. And these books.
Oh, it was in Florida.
Well, they're all over the country. I'm just going to use. I'm just going to use one over here. I'm just going to give you an idea of if I can find it real quick, because I want to do this accurately. I'm just looking through some notes. But the book is the book is called Trouble in the Hen House, and it's a union propaganda play put out by the California Federation of Teachers, which is a union affiliated with the AFT, American Federation of Teachers. Trouble in the Hen House is used in California elementary schools. In the play, Daisy the cow hammers the point home to the chickens about the importance of organizing themselves into a union. And I quote, I'm quoting the book now, "We're a group of working cows. We're strong because we all stick together and help each other. We decide what we need, and we pick leaders to talk to Farmer Brown, because he knows we stand behind our leaders. Now he gives us better hay, and we're not always so tired from having to give him so much milk." And end of quote. The teachers' union materials explain that the play should be used to teach students about the potential for power and collective action, and it's perfect for celebrating, and I quote, Cesar Chavez Day. Other materials recommended for classroom use, I'll give you one more. Can I bore you?
Oh, yes.
By the California Federation of, I have trouble saying California, include Along the Shore. It's a coloring book focusing on longshoremen. And, quote, simply but effectively showing the importance of unions in workers' lives. By the way, this meets K through 3 classroom standards for history and social studies in California.
We don't have a chance.
Anyway, sorry to do that, but you guys are getting me started. I get so excited about telling you all these things. By the way, I think there's a doctor down the hall to prescribe antidepressants after this. Yes, sir.
How difficult was it to research your book?
Extraordinarily so. Extraordinarily difficult. We had 2 people who we got a lot of help. There's 2 man-years of research in the book, and there's over 660 endnotes. And 2 of the people we used were senior officers in had been senior officers in the Department of Labor. So we had a lot of expertise. I am not an expert on this stuff. I have become an expert, whatever expert means, because of being involved in that research. There was over 500 interviews. It was very difficult, but I think we found some interesting things. Yes, sir.
Given the overwhelming threat that you've outlined with respect to possibly one-party domination as a result of the shadow bosses and the unionization, why, I mean, if it's obvious to you and other people, why is Republican leadership just so far behind on this? Again, I understand the thing about the elections, but why not?
There's always an election.
Exactly, but why isn't there more intelligent organization at that level at the RNC to try and combat this.
They love power more than freedom.
That's the point. Thank you. He answered the question more succinctly, better than I could. Say it nice and loud, sir, if you don't
They
mind.
love power more than they love freedom.
But I did read, I think that they hired this morning somebody from Google to handle the operations of the Republicans so that they could come up to standards like the Democrats did.
Right, but that has nothing to do with ideology. That has to do with power.
Getting it, okay, that's right.
Well, why don't they organize to protect their power? Why don't they
They
hire
can't see
the-
past the end of their nose. They really can't. And they figure
It's
they
a
can always
short-term
squeeze
thing.
out
It's
a
the
little
next
bit here.
election, not the long-term.
Yeah.
I'll go here and then here. Yes, ma'am.
For devil's advocate's sake, is there?
I'm sorry?
For devil's advocate's sake, is there any reasons for unions this day and age now that we have OSHA and all the other worker safety laws and
I am not against unions per se. What I am for is workers' rights. I believe anybody should be able to join a group if they want to. But nobody should be have to keep their job, and nobody should have to pay somebody to keep their job, and nobody should have to give away their right to sell their labor freely. Remember, if you're under a collective bargaining agreement, you don't have a right to sell your labor freely. You can't offer your labor to an institution because you're under a collective bargaining agreement. Now, if you want to give away your right to offer your labor freely, you should be able to. But nobody should force you to do that. And that's what's happening. I'm not going to tell you that unions shouldn't exist. I don't see the great need for them. But other people may, but that's not the point. The point is, let's give workers the right to make that decision. 93% of workers who are forced into unionism have never voted for or against the union. Maybe in 1960, 59, whenever the place organized, teachers' union, as an example, they want to teach in that school, they have to join the union and pay them dues if it's a forced dues state. They have never had a right to a secret ballot to vote for or against the union. The unions won't allow that to happen. They don't want to give workers freedom, and they'll do everything to intimidate, everything they can to stop that, because they know if that happens, they lose. That's all I'm suggesting is workers should have the right to make the decisions for themselves. If they want a union, at least give them a secret ballot every 3 years, 2 years, 5 years, 4 years, you name it. No union ever wants that to happen.
All right, so how do you push back on an individual basis or a grassroots basis? I mean, that's the problem. People know there's a
You support institutions like Heartland,
but that
and every
doesn't
state has
count
one.
the vote. And also, Google's on Obama's site anyway, so
Yep.
I don't know how great that is
I
for
know,
the Republicans
it
to hire
is.
Google. I mean, what? I mean, what is that going to do?
Yes, sir.
On a positive note, I wanted to, you brought up Wisconsin, and it's a place that voted for Obama. It's a state that elected Tammy Baldwin, who's really a Maoist, to the Senate, and yet Walker managed to break up collective bargaining, has appeared to have achieved a pretty significant success against the teachers union.
Yeah, he have. First of all, he didn't have success against the teachers union. He gave teachers freedom to make a choice.
Right. And
But remember,
apparently they've- yeah.
is Wisconsin a right to work state?
No.
Did he allow? Did it apply to everybody?
No, not teachers or police.
Cops and firemen.
Policemen, firemen, first responders. You know why? They threatened to create chaos if he did that. The union bosses did.
But here's my point.
So he
that-
took a baby step, but it's the right direction.
Yeah, and my question is, as a blueprint for some level of success on the ground,
Yes.
what can we learn? I don't have any illusions about Illinois. We're Darth Vader. We're a lost cause. But for states where there's still a chance, what does that tell us about a way forward in the future?
I think. And by the way, you didn't mention Kasich in Ohio.
Yeah, right.
Right, he had his head handed to him.
Yeah.
Right? Because he was doing the right thing. And then Walker said, I'm going to take a baby step. And it wasn't as more than a baby step, he took a significant step. I think you just have to take these steps, make it step by step. And the unions will do everything not to allow, I mean, remember, they went out there right now in Michigan, and they're doing 10-year agreements
Right.
to
Right.
keep their workers from being able to make a choice. They're trying to keep their workers from being able to make a choice. gonna have to be baby step, but that, I mean, that should be, I mean, that's just absurd to allow to happen, but 10 years will come and go, and they will, not good.
Yeah.
You make complete sense. It's very disturbing, although I think there is hope for Illinois. I hope. Maybe I'm delusional. But are we?
Possibly you were delusional about both things, making sense.
So you make sense, but why are we all the ones that are wrong? Why don't the American public understand this move towards socialism? I like using the term Agenda 21. A lot of people don't want to use that. They say you're too blunt back, you're too crazy. But why do more citizens, people don't seem to get this move towards socialism in your opinion?
Communism.
Because everybody wants something from government, and businesses under crony capitalism is as bad as some of the union movement, and so everybody's taking for government is just too damn big.
It's really more than that.
Oh yeah, you're right. It is a lot more than that.
I was in law school and a teacher, his name was Sylvester Petro. I remember, taught labor law. He walked in the first day of class and he said, before we start, I want you to think of every counselor, parent, uncle, teacher that you've had up till now who gave you any idea of this political leader. Not everybody did, but think about everybody who did. Were they liberal, were they conservative, were they left, were they right? And he opens up his newspaper and gave us 10 minutes. And I thought about it. Right? My father was so liberal, he didn't vote for Truman, he voted for Wallace. Everybody in my life, right through college, every single one. And then he stood up and he said, now ask yourself, up till now, have you been taught or indoctrinated? And the truth is, these kids are being indoctrinated.
Yeah.
And so they believe it.
And the media indoctrinates too. I mean, you've seen the surveys on the media.
Right.
We, as conservatives or liberals with a capital L, or people who want to stand for freedom, we have a problem too. If we find somebody in our movement or near our movement, we'd rather kill them as heretics than actually go after the infidels. We'd rather go after somebody frequently that we agree with 80% of the time than go after the person that we agree with 10% of the time. And that's a problem we have as well. I actually have a new book coming out April 8th called Big Tent, where we're going to examine that. HarperCollins.